Let us look at lines 44 to 49. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail, there gloom the dark broad seas, my mariners' souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me. That ever with a frolic welcome look took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. As the line he works his work, I mine, has reminded tell Ulysses of what his true work is. Ulysses now turns his attention to the harbour and the ship. His reflections on the meaninglessness of life in Ithaca, his joy in remembering his past days of battle and exploration, and his conviction that Telemachus is better suited to the duties of ruling than he is, all seem to move Ulysses to a decision. He will set sail on one last voyage. Ulysses looks towards the port, the ship, and the sea. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail, there gloom the dark, broad seas. These lines have several metrical irregularities. The stress on there at the start of each line and on broad. In place of iambs, these stresses create spondees, which give greater emphasis to each thing Ulysses notes. He is not merely observing, but insisting that these things are there, as if they are invitations that he cannot ignore. Ulysses now directly addresses his mariners, the men who have sailed and perhaps fought in war alongside him in the past. Just as he referred to himself in line 30 with the synedoche of spirit, he addresses these men as souls. This form of address is emphasized by the irregular stress on souls at the beginning of the line. The most important qualities of these men are the qualities of the soul, of their minds and hearts. When Ulysses describes their past history together, he begins with purely physical activity, toiled, but ends with mental activity, thought. These men had such strength of mind that they were equally happy to welcome both the thunder and the sunshine. Obstacles and danger could not frighten them or turn them aside from their goal. Ulysses concludes by focusing again on qualities of the mind. The sailors faced challenges with free hearts, free foreheads. The adjective free has connotations of nobility, like an aristocrat who is free-born, as opposed to someone who is an indentured servant or slave. It also suggests that Ulysses' men followed him out of their own free choice, not because they were commanded to. It was their love of adventure, of Ulysses himself, and their daring that led them to follow him into danger. Ulysses gives strong emphasis to these qualities by stressing each syllable in the phrase, creating more spondees. Lines 49 to 53. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honour and his toil. Death closes all. But something, ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. Ulysses now acknowledges in the most explicit way, so far that he has grown old. Nevertheless, he still insists that he and his men are still capable, in a way, of something like the heroism they showed when they were young. There is a strong caesura in the middle of line 49, free heats, old, etc., separating two starkly different ideas. Ulysses has been recounting the brave way that his men faced obstacles in the past with willing hearts and minds. Free hearts, free foreheads. And then, with the dash, he pauses at length before considering what he and his men are like now. He acknowledges to them, "You and I are old," placing old at the end of the line and making the line end stopped gives strong emphasis to the word old. This emphasis firmly reminds Ulysses that he and his men are not the same as they were in the past. But Ulysses goes on immediately to say, "Old age hath yet his honor and his toil." Honor and toil are both variations on words that he has already used in the poem. As a younger man, Ulysses was honored by people around the world. Line 15. As younger men, his mariners toiled with him. Line 46. Saying then that they can still have honor and toil reinforces Ulysses' claim that there is continuity between their younger selves and their older selves. They are still capable of some kind of heroism. He then elaborates on this idea. Line 50 begins with a spondee, old age, whose irregular double stress further emphasizes the fact that the men have indeed grown older. Line 51 too begins with a spondee, death closes all. The irregular stress on death emphasizes still further and more grimly the truth that Ulysses and his men have grown old and will soon die. But as in line 49, there is a strong caesura in the middle of line 51 as Ulysses introduces another starkly contrasting idea. But something ere the end. Ere is a short form for the word before. The caesura marks a pause while Ulysses lets the grim truth of mortality sink in. But he is also so determined to reclaim some of his harrowing youth that he does not even wait for another line to remind his men again that they can do some honorable deed. Ulysses does not specify what this deed might be. As in line 27, when he simply yearned for something more, he leaves it open-ended. But he knows that it can be noble, a word with aristocratic connotations that resonates with honor and free, in a way that is suitable for men who strove with gods when they were younger. Specifically, Ulysses says his noble work will be not unbecoming. This phrase is another example of litotes, a form of understatement, similar to the understatement of line 15, myself not least. The expression sounds modest, an acknowledgement that their powers are weaker. But litotes is often used ironically. And so here, it may actually be used to insist that the men are still capable of heroism in spite of their weakened powers. The line endings reinforce this optimistic note. There is a repeated D sound, consonants, at the end of lines 49, 51, and 53. Old, end, gods. Along with the word starting with D at the end of line 52 in the word done. This repeated sound links the concepts old, end, done, and gods. It suggests that even men who are aged, even men who are near death, can still achieve something that makes them comparable with the gods. Lines 54 to 59. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks, the long day wanes. The slow moon climbs, the deep moans around with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. Ulysses now observes how night is falling around the island. Evening is often used as a metaphor for old age, the twilight of life. As if thinking about these lines, Ulysses insists that despite their age, it is still not too late for him and his men to make one last voyage. Lines 54 to 55 have very irregular meters. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans around. The deep moans around with many voices. These spondees, a spondee is a metrical foot that consists of two stressed syllables. A metrical foot is a beat in a line of poetry. A spondee is not as common as other forms of metrical feet, such as the iamb. For example, day wanes, moon climbs, moans around. Slow the lines down considerably so that the reader experiences something like the greater slowness that old age brings. The adjectives long and slow also subtly suggest old age, but the image of the sea having voices reinforces the suggestions from lines 44-45, which goes, "There lies the port, my mariners," etc. But the sea is calling to Ulysses and inviting him to sail. Ulysses seems invigorated by the sea's invitation. After these slow-moving lines with their irregular extra stresses, lines 57 to 59 resume a regular iambic pentameter. They move much more quickly, as if with more energy, just as Ulysses is urging his men to spend their remaining energy pushing off from shore and smithing or beating the waves with their oars. Describing the waves as sounding furrows connects them to the ringing plains of Troy, where Ulysses felt so full of action and alive. If he can just convince his men to come aboard the ship and allow him to take one last voyage, perhaps he can feel alive again in the same way. In inviting his friends to seek a newer world with him, he asks them to help him reach the goal he expressed in lines 20 and 32, to reach an untraveled world and learn things beyond the utmost bound of human thought. It is not too late, he insists, to reach that goal. Even amidst this excitement, however, there are some ominous notes. The image of the voices in the sea could also suggest the idea of many people drowning and crying out from the water. And indeed, many of Ulysses' crew members did drown in Homer's version of the story. Even more ominous is the allusion to Dante's version of Ulysses' story. In Canto 26 of Dante's Inferno, Ulysses also acknowledges, "I and my shipmates had grown old and slow," but he still urges his men to go on a last voyage with him to the world where no one lives. This is a translation from Latin by Robert Hollander. This line parallels Ulysses urging his men that it is not too late to seek a newer world. But in Dante's version of the story, Ulysses' voyage does end with the entire crew drowning. This ominous note is picked up again in the next several lines of the poem. Lines 59 to 64. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be, but we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achiles whom we knew. In these lines, Ulysses most expressly expresses his desire to travel to the furthest possible reaches of the world. He also most fully expresses the possible dangers and rewards involved, revealing his ambition and his recklessness. After urging his friends to seek a newer world with him, Ulysses explains what it is he has in mind. In lines 20-21, he had yearned to see the untraveled world, whose margin, the horizon, receded as he tried to reach it. Receded means went further away. Now he is determined to reach the horizon and go beyond it. He will sail beyond the sunset and even beyond the baths of all the western stars. To a sailor, the setting sun and falling stars appear to sink into the ocean at the horizon. If Ulysses can find the place where the stars sink into the ocean baths, he will have achieved his goal of following knowledge like a sinking star in line 31. But if this voyage could fulfill all of Ulysses' dreams, it could also bring great danger. Ulysses says he wishes to continue traveling until he dies. It could be the voyage itself that kills him. He now acknowledges, it may be that the gulfs will wash us down. Once again, the parallel to Dante reminds the reader how real that danger is, because this is exactly how Ulysses and his men died in the Inferno, Canto 26, translated by Robert Hollander. There came, these are lines taken from the Inferno by Dante. There came a whirlwind that struck the ship head on. 3 times it turned her and all the waters with her. At the 4th our stern reared up, the prow went down, until the sea closed over us. In Dante's Inferno, Ulysses and his men die when the gulfs wash them down. This allusion suggests that Ulysses and his men may well die if they set sail after the poem's conclusion. But Tennyson's Ulysses is willing to accept the possibility that all of his crewmates will die so long as he achieves his goal. He says specifically, my purpose, it is for his dream that he asks his friends to be willing to sacrifice their lives. Here the reader sees an element of selfishness and recklessness in Ulysses' character alongside his nobility and heroism. Ulysses seeks to entice his crewmates onto this dangerous journey with promises of heroism. They may die, but they may also touch the happy isles, reaching the place where the blessed souls rest after death and see the great Achilles. This is a promise on his part. Achilles was the greatest of the Greek warriors and died fighting alongside Ulysses in the Trojan War. Ulysses may possibly be imagining that they could sail to the Happy Isles as living men. In Homer's Odyssey, they do sail to the underworld, and Odysseus speaks to the soul of Achilles. Reaching this realm would certainly be a heroic feat of exploration, as very few living humans ever reach the land of the dead. Ulysses may also be imagining that if they did die at sea, their heroic boldness would earn their souls a place in the Happy Isles alongside great heroes like Achilles. When he follows Achilles' name with the phrase, "whom we knew," Ulysses seems to wish to put himself and his men as peers, meaning equals, alongside Achilles and to claim a familiar greatness. Ulysses uses the same phrase, "it may be," first to introduce the possibility of dying and then to introduce the possibility of entering the most honored realm after death. It is as if he is trying to distract his crewmates from the fact that they may die, or to convince them that dying would be worth it if they could die with so much honor. Lines 65-67. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. Ulysses concludes by returning to the idea that even as old men, and he and his crewmates are still capable of a kind of greatness. They may have lost some of their physical prowess, but this only further highlights the greatness of their spirit and their character. Just as Ulysses immediately followed the line, "You and I are old," with the insistence that old age hath yet his honor, he admits that much is taken, only to insist immediately that much abides, much still remains, in other words. Time and age have taken away many of their abilities, especially their physical abilities. Still, they have not lost all of their heroic qualities. By repeating the same word much in both phrases, another example of diaco, Ulysses actually implies that their losses are balanced by what they retain. For every ability lost, there is an ability they still possess. Ulysses uses the same structure, loss, retention, in lines 66 and 67, when he admits that they have lost their strength but not their character. The strength that once moved earth and heaven seems to be the physical courage and skill required to fight on the plains of Troy, that is earth, and to strive with gods on their voyage, that is home, which is heaven. But in saying that which we are, Ulysses seems to refer to a quality that transcends the physical, which means that goes beyond the physical. Time has made them physically weak, but this special quality cannot be affected by time. Ulysses does not say that which we are in the past, we still are today. The phrase is entirely in the present tense. That which we are, we are. The present tense reinforces the idea that this quality is permanent and timeless. The next lines will define more fully what that quality is. The meter slows down considerably in these lines. Line 65 could be scanned as a line of regular iambic pentameter, but it has two caesuras that reduce its speed. Lines 66 and 67 could be scanned this way. We are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven. That which we are, we are. The lines have a high number of spondees. Almost every beat is stressed. These frequent stresses give strong emphasis to the words, reminding the reader that they have come almost to the finale and the climax of the poem. Ulysses is stating here his most important ideas, summing up what he sees as his identity. But the frequent stresses also create a sense of slowness, like the slowness of old age. The slow pace at which Ulysses speaks his heroic words reminds the reader of what Ulysses has lost, as well as what he retains. Line 68 to 70. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. When Ulysses says that which we are in line 67, that seems to refer to a spiritual quality. The men have lost one kind of strength, but they still have another. They are strong in will. Ulysses concludes his speech by explaining what that means. They are still determined to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. They may not be able to overcome every obstacle as they used to do. But they will still face obstacles with the same determination and bravery they always have. They may not have the same success, but they will never stop trying for it. They will never simply give up. It is significant that the last word of the line is yield. The line is a series of verbs in the infinitive, with the repeated verb forms, and the fact that this is the last line of the poem, there is a sense of progression, that the line is building towards a climax. To find, for example, is a natural development from to seek. The progression implies that the verbs will speak to greater and greater success as they go on. On this pattern, the last phrase might be something like to win the fight or to conquer still, verbs of heroic achievement. But instead, the speaker reverses the pattern and gives a verb that speaks to failure, that is yield. And yield basically means to submit or give in. Of course, the verb is in the negative. The point is that they will not yield. But merely using the verb cannot help calling the idea of failure into the reader's mind. It reminds the reader that there was the possibility of yielding for men aged and weakened like Ulysses and his crew. A reader could easily imagine that they might be tempted to yield in the face of certain dangers, or even to yield to their own mortality and accept a humbler, more sedentary life. The fact that these men face such strong temptation to stop striving, to stop pursuing heroic achievement, and that they persist in spite of those temptations makes their perseverance all the more heroic. Ending the poem on the phrase "and not to yield" raises the possibility of giving up even as it denies that possibility. It suggests that Ulysses is now heroic, not in spite of his limitations, but because of them. His heroism lies in continuing to test human limits, even as his own abilities have become so much more limited. The meter of these last three lines contributes to the optimistic sense at the poem's end. Lines 66-67 radically altered the poem's meter, stressing almost every syllable and greatly slowing the poem down. In the final three lines, the meter becomes regular iambic pentameter again, and so reads much more quickly and energetically. It is as if the poem was losing strength as it neared its conclusion, but then regained strength and energy at the very end. Just as Ulysses has felt his strength failing as he has aged, but hopes to make one last great show of heroism before he dies. These lines also feature alliteration and consonance. The H sound in heroic hearts and the S in strong, strive and seek create a unified sound and link together key ideas that start with the same letter. Word endings repeat as well. The T in hearts and fate, the I in will and yield, and the D in find and yield. Repeating these strong consonants creates a sense of harmony and confidence in these final lines of the poem. With this, we come to an end of the line-wise explanation of the poem Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson.